Lyra Vaughn stood before the shattered window of the Karani Command Center, her gaze fixed on the city of Alteris 4 below. The streets, once lined with shining crystal towers and bustling with the vibrant life of a peaceful people, now lay in ruins. The once majestic skyline was barely recognizable, marred by the burning wreckage of buildings, craters from the countless bombs dropped by the Drowan Empire. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid taste of fear lingering in her throat. Lyra hadn't slept in days. Her blue skin, though still beautiful, was pale with exhaustion. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she stared out into the vastness, the war unfolding beneath her. The weight of responsibility crushed her, but she would not let it show. Not in front of her people. The door behind her creaked open, the sound echoing through the empty command room. Commander Ely Kent stepped in, his uniform torn and covered in the grime of battle. His slender frame seemed even more fragile now, his shimmering blue skin dulled by exhaustion. His eyes, once bright with the unyielding hope of a warrior, now carried the dull sheen of defeat. "Administrator," he said, his voice low and heavy. "The latest reports from the eastern sector." Mira turned, taking the tablet he handed her. She already knew what it would say. The same grim numbers, the same grim fate. "How bad?" she asked, though the question felt pointless. They both knew. "The Draorans have broken through our last defense line," Eli replied. His voice was devoid of emotion, a flat, mechanical delivery, as if his very spirit had been drained. "We have perhaps 2 days before they reach the capital." Lyra's chest tightened. Her hands trembled as she studied the tablet. Over 70% of their military forces had been lost in the last 48 hours. Food supplies were running low. Their civilians were crammed into overcrowded refugee centers, desperate and scared. And the worst part? They were too few to fight back. "And our evacuation ships?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Eli's eyes flickered to the ground. "We can save perhaps 5% of the population," he muttered, his words barely audible. She let out a soft, bitter laugh, a sound devoid of humor, full of irony. "We must decide who lives and who dies," she said almost to herself. There was no other way around it. The Karani were a peaceful people, artists, philosophers, and scientists. They had no enemies before the Draorans arrived. But now, faced with extinction, they had no choice but to fight. Lyra closed her eyes, the weight of it all settling heavily on her shoulders. She had been an administrator, a leader in times of peace. But she had never been prepared for this, never imagined that her people would be thrust into a battle for survival. "Call the council," Lyra said after a long moment, her voice steady despite the growing panic in her chest. We need to make the final call." Before Eli could respond, a young officer burst into the room. Her wide eyes flicked nervously between the two, her breathing frantic. "Administrator, Commander, the sensors? They've picked up multiple ships entering our system." Eli's shoulders sagged. More Draoran reinforcements. He was already anticipating the worst. But the officer's next words made his heart stutter. "No, sir. These are different," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "They don't match any known Draorn ship patterns." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the main command screen, where the officer had already started displaying the ship's trajectories. 12 sleek vessels, painted white and blue, were moving into position around Alteris 4. Strange markings were etched along their hulls, markings none of them recognized. "Are they hostile?" Lyra asked, barely daring to hope. "No, ma'am," the officer replied. "They're moving into defensive positions around our planet, placing themselves between us and the Drowan fleet." A hush fell over the room. The officers, the command staff, everyone was silent, staring at the unknown ships. They had been fighting for so long, yet now, just as their hope was nearly extinguished, these ships had arrived. "We're receiving a transmission from the largest ship," the communications officer called out. The screen flickered and a face appeared. A human face. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The man on the screen had light brown skin and dark hair cut short, wearing a uniform she didn't recognize. His face was flat, with a protruding nose and small ears, unmistakably human. "This is Captain Frank Winters of the United Earth Fleet," the man said in a deep, calm voice. "We received your distress signal. Hold position. Help has arrived." The room fell deathly silent. Lyra's heart raced, her mind struggling to process the words. Could it be true? Had help truly arrived? After everything, after all the devastation, was there finally hope? "Are you real?" Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. Captain Winters smiled slightly. "Very real, Administrator Vaughn. We've been exploring this sector for the past 6 months. We picked up fragments of your distress calls and came to investigate." He paused. "But why are you fighting alone? The Drorans have left a trail of destroyed worlds behind them. We've seen enough to know that they must be stopped." Lyra felt a spark, the smallest flicker of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. The Drorans were coming, but this time they might not win. The message ended, leaving Lyra and Eli standing in stunned silence. Just as all seemed lost, humans, strangers to them, but their potential salvation, had arrived. "Prepare the shuttle," Lyra said finally, her voice firm with renewed resolve. "We must meet them." With one last glance at the ruins outside, Lyra and Eli turned to leave the command center. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had something to fight for. The air in the command center was thick with anticipation. Lyra Vaughn stood at the window once more, her gaze drawn to the fleet of human ships that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, drifting into the Alteris IV system like a beacon of salvation. The ships were sleek and streamlined, far more agile than any of the Draoran warships that had relentlessly attacked her people for the past 2 years. Their hulls gleamed a cool white under the planet's dim light, the strange markings on their sides reflecting something Lyra hadn't seen in too long. Hope. At her side, Commander Eli Kent studied the data feed as it flashed across the laser plasma display. His expression was unreadable, but Lyra knew him well enough to see the flicker of disbelief in his eyes. The display showed a series of complex maneuvers as the human fleet positioned itself strategically around the planet, preparing for whatever the Draorans would throw at them. The human ships weren't just armed. They were prepared for war in a way the Karani had never seen. Captain Frank Winters and his fleet had arrived, but would it be enough to turn the tide? "I never thought I'd see this day," Eli murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lyra looked at him, his once strong features now etched with the lines of exhaustion and doubt. The Draoran Empire had devastated their world, and now, with the last defense lines crumbling, the appearance of these strangers felt almost surreal. How could they possibly help? They weren't Kirani. They didn't understand the sacrifices her people had made. But then again, maybe, just maybe, they could show them a new way to fight. A light buzzed from the communication panel, and Captain Winters' face appeared on the screen, his dark eyes calm and measured as he spoke. "Administrator Vaughn, Commander Ken, this is Captain Frank Winters of the United Earth Fleet. We received your distress signal. Hold your position. Help has arrived." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. The weight of them settled in her chest. Could it be? Were they really here? For them? "Are you real?" Lyra's voice trembled, betraying the hope she felt stirring within her. She could feel the knot in her stomach tighten as she searched his face for any sign of deceit. "We're very real, Administrator," Captain Winters said with a slight reassuring smile. "We've been exploring this sector for months, piecing together fragments of your distress calls. We came to investigate, but your planet's plight was already known to us." Eli stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Why are you helping us?" His voice was blunt, edged with skepticism. "You don't even know us. This isn't your war." "We've seen what the Drorans are doing to civilizations across the galaxy," Winters said, his tone hardening with determination. "The oppression, the destruction. We can't stand by and do nothing." He paused, and his expression softened. "You're not alone in this fight anymore. We will stand beside you, Administrator, and we will stop the Drorans. Together. Lyra's heart raced. The words were powerful, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in them. The humans, with their advanced technology and strategic genius, could give them a fighting chance. She turned to Eli, who met her gaze with the same uncertainty. They both knew the odds. This was their final shot at survival. "Captain Winters," Lyra said, her voice stronger now. "We have nothing left. You've promised us hope. Can you truly deliver?" "We can and we will," Winters replied. "But there's no time to waste. We'll need to move quickly. I suggest you gather your people. We'll begin by sharing our strategy, and Commander Kent, I'd like you to join me in planning the defense." Eli nodded stiffly, his skepticism still lingering but tempered by a sliver of trust. "I'll gather the commanders," he said, turning to leave the room. As Lyra followed him out, she felt the weight of the decision settle over her. The Karani were not soldiers. They were scholars, artists, philosophers. But they had no choice now. If they wanted to survive, they had to fight. And the humans, with their military expertise, had shown them that even the most peaceful societies could transform when their survival depended on it. Training began the next day. Lyra watched as the Karani civilians, once proud of their peaceful heritage, stood alongside human soldiers in the training yards. Their once calm faces now wore the expressions of determination, gritted teeth, and raw emotion. Lieutenant Maria Delgado stood among them, guiding the Karani through basic combat maneuvers. At first, the Karani struggled with the weight of the weapons, unfamiliar with the movements required, but as the hours passed, something remarkable began to happen. They adapted. Jorith, a former teacher who had never picked up a weapon before, now held a plasma rifle with surprising confidence, his eyes hardening with every shot. He was learning to fight, and he was teaching others alongside him. The Kirani weren't just training to defend, they were learning how to become a cohesive unit, ready to stand alongside humans in the battle for their survival. As the humans drilled them, teaching them how to use adaptive shield technology and how to engage in guerrilla tactics, a sense of purpose began to emerge. They weren't just waiting to be saved. They were fighting for their world, their future. And, with the help of Captain Winters and his team, they were learning that it was possible to win. Back in the command center, Colonel Jack Rivera and Commander Eli Kent pored over battle plans, analyzing Droran strategies and preparing the Karani for their first real test. The human tactical genius was evident in every detail, from the placement of defensive positions to the use of decoy maneuvers and electronic warfare. It was a strategy unlike anything the Karani had ever known, and Eli found himself astonished at the precision with which the humans conducted their operations. "You're not just saving us," Eli muttered to Rivera one night as they reviewed the plan. "You're teaching us how to win." Rivera, ever pragmatic, simply nodded. "We're teaching you how to survive," he said. "The rest is up to you." As the days passed, the Kairani soldiers, no longer just civilians but fighters, stood side by side with the humans. Together, they would strike back. Together, they would give the Drorans a fight they had never expected. Lyra stood on the balcony overlooking the capital, watching as the training continued below. The laser plasma displays flickered with updated information, the system now filled with data about the Droran fleet's movements. The battle was coming, and this time, the Karani were not waiting to be conquered. They were ready to fight. Lyra turned to Eli, who stood beside her. His face was grim, but beneath the weariness there was a glimmer of something she hadn't seen in him in a long time. Hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, the Karani could do more than survive. They could win. The time for talking was over. Humanity had arrived, and with them came the knowledge, the tactics, and the spirit of resistance. The Droran Empire had underestimated the power of unity, and the Kirani, once a peaceful people, would now fight for the survival of their world, and they would do it with the strength of their newfound allies. The battle had only just begun. The morning air on Alteris 4 felt different. The hum of activity across the training grounds was sharper, more urgent. The human soldiers, organized and efficient, moved with an energy that contrasted with the Qurani's hesitant steps as they learned to wield weapons and adapt to military discipline. The transformation had begun, slowly but steadily. The civilians who once spoke only of peace were now fighting to protect their homes. Ira Vaughn stood off to the side, watching as Lieutenant Maria Delgado barked orders at a group of Qurani recruits. Their movements were still clumsy, awkward even, but they were trying, and that was something. "They're learning faster than I expected," Eli Kent remarked quietly beside her. His voice was hoarse, the weight of their new reality pressing down on him. Lyra didn't respond immediately, her eyes scanning the training field. A young Qurani man, barely an adult, stumbled as he tried to lift a heavy plasma rifle, his body unused to the weight. The weapon clattered to the ground with a loud thud. Maria walked over, her posture sharp as ever, and helped the man back onto his feet. "Focus," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Strength comes from control, not from power alone. Keep it steady." Lyra exhaled. The pace was slower than she'd hoped, but it was happening. The Qurani were learning, adapting in ways they hadn't thought possible. Back inside the command center, the atmosphere had shifted from desperation to something new. Anticipation. Captain Frank Winters was standing at the center of the room, a laser plasma display flickering in front of him as he reviewed the final plans for the first tactical operation. "This is where we begin," Winters said, his voice steady as the Qurani and human commanders gathered around. Colonel Jack Rivera, his face lined with determination, stood next to him. The human forces had proven their worth during the initial skirmishes, but this next step would require all their cunning. "I'll lead the operation," Colonel Rivera said, his gaze locked on the display. "We've gathered intel on the Drayorn communication network. We disrupt their outer defenses, sow confusion, and weaken their ability to coordinate. It'll give us the window we need to push deeper." Eli Kent frowned, his eyes tracking the map of enemy positions. "Disrupting their communications won't be enough. If we don't take action on the ground, it'll just be a temporary victory." Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "We'll send the Qurani forces to engage. We'll use the same tactics you've been teaching us. We've learned enough to make a difference. We can't afford to wait any longer." Winters turned to her, his eyes filled with something Lyra had not seen in a long while. Approval. "You're right, we push together, the Qurani fight alongside us. We're stronger this way." The operation began at dusk as the shadows of the Drayorn fleet loomed ominously in the sky. Maria Delgado's team, now fully equipped with human gear, made their way toward the first of the Drayorn communication relays. The heads-up displays inside their helmets provided a constant flow of information, tracking every movement, every heartbeat, every target. "We've got company," Maria said through the comms, her voice a whisper of tension. Ahead, several Drayorn sentries patrolled the relay station, their reptilian forms blending into the night. But Maria's team was faster, quieter. With a series of calculated movements, Private Greg Patel deployed a EMP device, neutralizing the outer defenses without a sound. The sentries didn't know what hit them. They barely had time to react before the human Marines were on them, incapacitating them with precise non-lethal force. Within minutes, the relay station was theirs. "We're in," Maria reported, her voice steadied despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Comm system is down, now we wait for the next phase." Back at the command center, Winters observed the operation unfold on the laser plasma display, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the console as he tracked the progress of his team. The first step had been successful, but this was just the beginning. He turned to the gathered officers, his tone serious. "The Drorans will retaliate once they realize what we've done. We've made them react. That's our advantage." The Qurani were ready. Despite their initial struggles, their first taste of victory had ignited something within them. Jorith, once a teacher and now a soldier, stood at the training ground, his plasma rifle steady in his hands as he prepared for their next operation. The fear that had gripped him when he first held the weapon was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. His thoughts wandered briefly to the human Marines, their way of moving, thinking, and fighting. He had come to respect them more than he thought possible. But more than that, he admired their commitment. They fought not for territory or power, but for something more. Freedom. Lyra joined him quietly, her eyes reflecting the growing confidence in her people. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Jorith gave a small nod. "I never thought I'd say this, but yes, we are ready." The second phase of the operation was underway. Colonel Rivera led the human Marines and their Kirani counterparts into the heart of the Draran defenses. The plan was simple: take the remaining communication hubs offline and use the chaos to launch a strike against a key Draran ground base. The Kirani had trained for this moment, their movements now swift and sure. "Move out!" Rivera commanded, and the Marines surged forward with precision. As they advanced, Eli Kent worked in the command center, guiding them with tactical information drawn from the heads-up displays and human intelligence. His mind raced as he saw the Draran responses to their disruptions. "They're adapting," he muttered under his breath, "but we can still outmaneuver them." Back on the ground, the fighting was fierce but controlled. The Kirani were no longer afraid. They fought with the same resilience that had made their civilization great, and with the guidance of their human allies, they pushed the Drorans back. Each victory, no matter how small, brought them closer to the goal. As the day drew to a close, the laser plasma displays flashed with updates. Droran reinforcements were moving in, but they were scattered and confused. The human strategy had worked. The Drorans were not prepared for a fight like this. And now, with the Kirani fighting at their side, the enemy was outmatched. Lyra stood tall, watching the battle unfold on the screens. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. The beginning of the end. The human forces had proven that hope wasn't just a fleeting idea. It was something real, something that could be fought for. As the operation continued and the Kirani and humans advanced together, the first cracks appeared in the Draorn hold on the galaxy. It was no longer just about survival. It was about victory. The sky above Alteris 4 crackled with energy as the Alliance fleet moved into position. Captain Frank Winters stood at the command console, his sharp gaze fixed on the laser plasma display in front of him. Lieutenant Maria Delgado watched over his shoulder, her pulse steady despite the rising tension. The moment had arrived, what they had trained for, what they had hoped for. Now it was time to see if their efforts would hold up. "Allen ships, move into position," Winters ordered, his voice steady, though there was no hiding the weight of responsibility that hung over him. "We hit them fast, we hit them hard. Everyone knows their roles. Let's show the Draorans that we're not backing down." The fleet of human vessels, sleek and deadly, shifted into formation, their shields already pulsing with energy. Behind them, the Kirani ships flanked the human fleet, their technology still unfamiliar to them but becoming more synchronized with each passing day. The Draorn fleet loomed ahead, massive and imposing, their weapons ready to unleash chaos. But the humans had something the Draorns had never anticipated: tactical ingenuity. "Fire all weapons on my mark," Winters commanded, his eyes narrowing. Colonel Jack Rivera stood by his side, hands poised above his control panel, ready to give the order at a moment's notice. The first volley from the Drorans lit up the dark expanse, massive blasts tearing through the void toward the advancing Alliance fleet. But the human ships responded with grace, their adaptive shields absorbing the fire, learning with each strike how to better defend against the incoming attacks. "Shields holding," a voice called out from the command center. Winters gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. "Not for long. Target their forward command ship, disable their weapons first. We'll deal with the rest after." The fleet surged forward, missiles and kinetic projectiles launched with deadly intent. The Draorn ships, though heavily armored, were slow to adjust to the humans' unpredictable tactics. Where the Draorns favored brute force, the humans danced around their blows, using speed and agility to their advantage. On the ground, Lieutenant Maria Delgado led a team of human Marines and Kirani fighters, racing toward an area in the outskirts of Alteris 4 that had been overrun by the Draorns. The Kirani civilians trapped within were their primary concern. Their mission was to rescue as many as possible before the Draorns realized they were being attacked. Move out! Move out! Maria's orders cut through the air as the team sprinted across the barren landscape. The Kirani civilians they were aiming to liberate had been held at a Draendorn-controlled compound just a few miles from the battlefield. The clock was ticking, and there was no room for error. As they neared the compound, the team split up, each taking a different route. Private Greg Patel, always the first to charge, led the way through the northern entrance, while Corporal Leah Jones followed through the west. Maria took the southern route, her plasma rifle slung over her shoulder. There was no time to hesitate. The Draeoran forces were spread thin, but their brutality was unmatched. The ground would be stained with the blood of those who didn't make it out in time. "Target sighted," said Greg over the comms. "We're in position." "On you," Maria replied. They struck in unison. The Kirani fighters, newly trained but eager to help, moved with purpose. They had only just begun their training, but the sight of their people in danger pushed them into action. Jorith, the teacher-turned-soldier, was at the front of one of the squads. His plasma rifle roared to life as he fired at the Draeoran sentries positioned outside the compound. "Cover me!" Maria shouted, rushing into the compound's main building, her rifle aimed and ready. Greg and Leah followed close behind, covering the rear. The Drorans reacted quickly, firing back with their own advanced weapons. The air sizzled with blasts, but the Alliance forces pressed forward, the human Marines using their speed and training to disable the Droran soldiers. The Kirani fighters, under the watchful eye of their human allies, proved themselves capable, their fire hitting their marks as they protected the civilians huddled within the compound. Maria's heads-up display blinked as she received a new update. "Civilians secured, sir," Greg called out, breathing hard. "We've got them, but the Drorans are regrouping." "Fall back to the extraction point," Maria ordered. The team retreated, her voice calm even though the situation was anything but. The Drorans were regrouping for a counterattack, and the Alliance forces needed to get out before they were overwhelmed. Back in space, the Droran command ship was finally beginning to show signs of weakness. The human ships, thanks to their adaptive shields and stealth tactics, had disabled most of the fleet's offensive capabilities. The Drorans, once proud and ruthless, were beginning to show cracks in their defense. They had underestimated the ingenuity of the humans. And the Kirani. "We've got him on the ropes," Colonel Rivera said, watching the laser plasma display as the Draeorn fleet began to break formation. But the victory would not be theirs for long. The Draeorns were resilient, and their response would be swift and unforgiving. "Prepare for Phase 2, Winter said, his voice steady. "We finished this here, now." The Draeorn retaliation came quickly. In the skies above Altiris IV, the remaining Draeorn ships launched their full offensive. Massive energy blasts shot toward the Alliance fleet. Each strike a direct hit. But the adaptive shields absorbed the fire, learning from each blast how to better protect the ships. On the ground, the human Marines and Kirani fighters fought side by side, pushing back the Draeorn forces that had attempted to regroup. The battle was far from over, but there was a growing sense of accomplishment. Maria Delgado had seen it in the Kirani fighters' eyes. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. Back in space, the final assault began. Captain Winters issued the final orders as the Alliance ships moved in for the kill. The Draorans tried to flee, but it was too late. The human fleet disabled their last remaining warship, capturing the Draeron command ship in the process. The victory was hard-earned. Draeorn reinforcements were already on their way, but the battle had given the Alliance a much-needed boost. The Kirani, once a peaceful species, had fought back. They had fought not only for their homes, but for the future of their people, and for the galaxy. The Draeorns had been stopped, but the war was far from over. As Winters surveyed the battlefield, a sense of calm settled over him. "This is just the beginning," he murmured, knowing that the real challenge lay ahead. They had won the first clash, but the Draeoran Empire was not finished yet. The laser plasma displays flickered in the darkened command center aboard the Dauntless. The hum of machinery was drowned by the urgency in Captain Frank Winters' voice. "All ships, brace for incoming fire. The Drorans are not done yet." The Alliance fleet had been riding the wave of victory, but it was short-lived. The Draoran Empire had begun their retaliation, a massive counteroffensive that had thrown the balance of power back into their favor. With overwhelming numbers and relentless aggression, the Draorans were pushing the Alliance to the brink. "Captain, they're closing in fast," said Commander Nuan, her voice calm but strained as she monitored the incoming Draoran fleet. The glowing dots on the display shifted rapidly, signaling an enemy formation. "Activate the shields. Keep our distance," Winters ordered, his face hardening with the weight of the responsibility. On the surface of Alteris 4, Lieutenant Maria Delgado was coordinating the retreat of the Karani civilians. The battle had raged for hours, but the Draoran forces had begun to overwhelm their positions. The humans and Karani fighters, fully trained now, had held the line, but at great cost. "Fall back to the secondary defense points," Maria's voice cut through the chaos as the Draoran assault teams pushed forward. They had lost the northern trenches, and it was only a matter of time before the city was under siege. Back at the command center, Lyra Vaughn, the Karani administrator, stood rigid, watching the battle unfold across the plasma display. Commander Eli Kent was beside her, his face tense as he observed the Draoran movements on the screen. "We need to fall back," Eli said, his voice low. "We can't hold them here, not with the forces we have left." Lyra clenched her fists, her eyes narrowing. "No," she said firmly. "This is our world. We fight until the last breath." But the truth hung between them like a heavy silence. She could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on her. The Draorans had anticipated their every move, and it was clear their survival was now in jeopardy. "Humanity is not going to leave us now," Eli added. "We need them more than ever." In the command center of the Dauntless, Captain Winters addressed his team, his voice steady despite the tension growing in the room. "We need a solution. The Draorans are adapting faster than we anticipated." Commander Nuan tapped a few commands into her console, pulling up a schematic of the Draoran fleet. "They're too predictable," she said. "We can use that to our advantage." "We need something that will disrupt their coordination," Winters said, his fingers drumming on the edge of the table. "Something that will blind their forces." It was then that Lieutenant Jack Rivera, standing beside the tactical display, spoke up. "We could try the new energy disruption field we've been developing. We already know it works on their shields. If we scale it up, we might be able to knock out their entire fleet's systems." Winters glanced at Nuan, who gave a nod of approval. "Let's make it happen," he said, the decision made. Meanwhile, in the training halls of the Dauntless, the Kirani soldiers were putting their skills to the test. They had come a long way since their first hesitant steps into combat. No longer the pacifists they once were, they now fought like seasoned veterans. Their weapons felt heavier, but their resolve was stronger. Jorith, the former teacher, now stood in the front lines with his Karani unit, holding his weapon firmly. The Draoran forces had pushed them into retreat, but the Karani soldiers stood tall. They no longer faltered at the sight of the enemy. "Remember, aim for the weak points," Jorith instructed, his voice steady as he led his people into battle. He had gone from teacher to leader in a matter of days. "We are no longer just survivors. We are warriors." His squad, once terrified and uncertain, now moved with purpose, their combat training coming to life in the heat of the conflict. The Karani's transformation was complete. They had shed their former selves and embraced their new identity. Fighters. Back at the Dauntless, the energy disruption field was ready. Commander Nuan and Captain Winters were standing over the newly modified device, a piece of advanced human technology now modified to take on the Draoran fleet. "Activate the field," Winters ordered. The device hummed to life, its blue glow filling the room. The Draoran ships were in position, the final move about to be made. The time to act was now. "Power levels are optimal," Nuan reported. "We can hit them from here." Winters looked up at her. "Prepare the fleet. It's time for Phase 2. As the Draoran ships closed in on Alteris 4, the Alliance forces held their breath. The field would either work or it wouldn't. There was no middle ground. If they failed, the Draorans would sweep through and crush everything in their path. The Draorans began their final push. Energy beams, sharp and bright, sliced through the black sky, heading straight for the Alliance ships. Just as the blasts reached their targets, the energy disruption field activated. The results were immediate. The Draoran fleet shuddered as their energy systems flickered and failed. Ships that had been charging forward halted, unable to move. Weapon systems went dark. The Draoran fleet was temporarily blind. "Now!" Winters shouted. "Hit them with everything we've got." The Alliance forces surged forward. The human fleet, still intact, launched a relentless counterattack. Draoran ships, once unstoppable, now moved sluggishly, vulnerable to the barrage of human firepower. Khairani ships, once unsure of their place in the battle, fired with deadly accuracy, helping turn the tide. The ground battle intensified as Lieutenant Maria Delgado led her squad toward the Draoran command center. Their mission was simple: capture the remaining enemy forces and disrupt their ability to regroup. But even as the Draorans were stunned by the Alliance's response, their retaliation was swift. They pushed back, trying to reclaim lost ground. "Move! Move! Move!" Maria shouted, leading her team into the fray. The sound of her plasma rifle firing rang out, joining the chaos of battle around her. The human Marines and Khairani soldiers fought side by side, cutting through the Draoran defenses. But the Draorans were not giving up easily. Their superior numbers pushed the Alliance forces to the edge. Maria Delgado, in the midst of the battle, felt the weight of the war closing in on her. They couldn't afford to lose ground now. "Push forward," she yelled, even as the Dryad forces dug in their heels. Jorith, alongside his fellow Khairani, fought valiantly, showing the strength of his people's transformation. No longer were they the peaceful citizens they once were. They had become soldiers, fighters, defenders. The battle raged on. It was far from over. The Draorans had been momentarily stunned, but they were regrouping. The Alliance forces, battered but not broken, held the line. Their tactics, their innovations, their unity, it had all come together. But this was just the beginning. As Winters surveyed the battlefield, he knew that this victory would not be enough. The Draorans would return. They always did. The question now was whether humanity and their allies would be ready for the next fight. "We've bought ourselves time," Winters said quietly, watching the Draoran ships drift into retreat. But it's far from over. The laser plasma displays flashed as Captain Winters stood in the center of the command room, his voice low but resolute. "It's now or never. We push forward, and we do it together." He gazed at the Draoran fleet, its vast array of ships dark against the backdrop of the nearby planet. For the past months, the humans and their allies had fought tirelessly, but the final battle loomed large, one that would decide the fate of the galaxy. "We hit them hard," Winters continued, his eyes narrowed with focus. "We used the energy disruption field on their main fleet first. No hesitation. Commander Nuan and Colonel Rivera flanked him, both showing signs of battle fatigue, but unwavering in their resolve. "The field's active, Captain," Nuan said, her hand steady as she adjusted the final parameters on the plasma display. "Ready to deploy," Rivera added. "Ground forces are prepped and waiting. We'll hit their capital once we clear the space lanes." The plan was simple, but the stakes were monumental. The energy disruption field was the key. It had worked once before, but there was no guarantee it would succeed against the Draorans' newly reinforced fleet. If the Draorans adapted again, the Alliance could lose everything. Outside the Dauntless, the Allied fleet surged forward, ships moving with coordinated precision. The Khairani fleet, once hesitant in battle, was now fully integrated into the human ranks. They fought like warriors, their ships aligned and synchronized with human tactics, each maneuver more fluid than the last. Lyra Vaughn, standing beside Eli Kent, could hardly recognize the people she had once led as civilians. They had become a force in their own right. She watched as the energy disruption field pulsed across the Draoran fleet, sending shock waves through the space around them. Draoran ships faltered, their weapons sputtering to life before failing completely. The Draoran fleet was momentarily crippled. "Now!" Winters' voice echoed over the intercom as the Alliance launched its counteroffensive. Draoran ships that had been charging forward suddenly halted, vulnerable, their engines failing as the Alliance ships descended upon them. On the surface of Alteris F, the battle had already begun. Colonel Rivera led the human and Karani ground forces in a full assault on the Draoran capital. The Draoran defenders, though battered, fought with a relentless fury, pushing back with every step the Alliance took. Lieutenant Maria Delgado was at the forefront, her plasma rifle held firm. She moved with precision, her unit in tight formation behind her. The Draoran ground forces were entrenched, but the Karani had learned quickly, their tactics now as effective as the humans' own. "Push forward, don't let them regroup," Maria shouted, rallying her forces as they advanced toward the main gate of the Draoran citadel. The buildings around them shuddered under the weight of the ongoing conflict, debris and dust filling the air as explosions rocked the landscape. Back in the sky, Jorith, the former teacher-turned-warrior, was part of a special squadron tasked with securing the final blow to the Draoran fleet. He had grown from the hesitant civilian he once was into one of the most strategic minds the Karani had ever produced. The Draoran fleet was in disarray, but they were not gone yet. The Draoran command ship, the Zur, loomed large in the distance. It was their flagship, the heart of their fleet. Jorith watched the energy disruption field ripple through space, rendering the Draoran shields useless. This was the opening they needed. "Strike now," Jorith ordered, his voice cutting through the comms as his ship's cannons fired, tearing through the weakened Draoran shields. The Alliance fleet swarmed the Zyar, but even in their disarray, the Draorans fought back with vicious determination. "We're making progress, but not enough," Eli Kent muttered as he piloted his ship in for another run. His tactical mind was working overtime, calculating the Draoran responses and adjusting on the fly. "We need to cripple their engines, or we'll be fighting them for hours." On the ground, Maria and her squad continued their assault on the Draoran capital. The Draorans had fortified their positions, and their counterattacks were brutal. But the Alliance pressed on, pushing through street by street, building by building. The sound of weapon fire, explosions, and shouts of soldiers echoed through the once pristine city. Maria spotted a group of Draoran soldiers trying to regroup behind a barricade. She lifted her plasma rifle, taking careful aim as she fired. The shot was clean, precise, and the barricade exploded in a shower of debris, throwing the Draorans into disarray. "We're almost there," she said, breathing hard as she scanned the battlefield. Her unit pushed forward, moving with renewed confidence. The battle for Alteris IV was almost won, but the real fight was in space. The Alliance had to finish the Draorans once and for all. The space battle had reached its fever pitch. Winters watched as his fleet moved in for the final strike, targeting the Zur. The Draoran flagship was vulnerable now, its once mighty defenses shattered by the energy disruption field. But the Draorans were not done yet. They had one final trick up their sleeve. "Brace for impact," Nuan shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. The Draorans had fired their last weapon, an EMP burst designed to take down the Alliance fleet's shields. But the Dauntless was ready. Winters had anticipated this move, and the shielding was already rerouted to survive the impact. The EMP hit, but the Dauntless held firm, its shields flickering but holding steady. "Now!" Winters barked. "Finish them." With a coordinated volley of fire from the Alliance fleet, the Zir exploded in a magnificent fireball, its remains scattered across the void of space. The Draoran fleet faltered, their flagship gone, their command structure in ruins. On the ground, Jorith and his team stormed the Draoran command center, their weapons flashing as they cut down the last of the Draoran resistance. The capital was theirs. The Draoran forces, though powerful, had been broken. The Alliance had fought with everything they had, and now they had won. Jorith stood at the center of the Draoran capital, his breath heavy, his face bloodied but triumphant. "We did it," he whispered, looking around at the ruins. His transformation from teacher to soldier was complete. The Alliance had emerged victorious, but at a great cost. The Draorans had been defeated, their empire in shambles. The Alliance forces, though weary, had achieved the impossible. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But even as the battle ended, the cost was clear. There had been sacrifices, moments of heroism and blood spilled. The war was over, but the scars it left would remain forever. And as Winters stood at the command center of the Dauntless, he knew that while the Drorans had been defeated, their enemies would rise again. The war was over, but the fight would never truly end. The battlefield was silent now, its once chaotic expanse lying still under the weight of the aftermath. Draoran ships drifted aimlessly in space, their engines dead, their once proud fleet broken beyond repair. The victory had been hard won, but now it was undeniable. Captain Winters stood at the bridge of the Dauntless, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze steady on the viewscreen. The Droran forces had retreated into the void, their empire fractured, and the alliance of species now stood in the light of a new day. The war was over, but the rebuilding would be a long and arduous task. "Captain?" Commander Nguyen spoke from behind him. "We've received the first reports from Alteris IV. The Karani are already mobilizing to rebuild their cities. The alliance is forming as we speak." Winters nodded. "It's just the beginning. We've lost so much, but the road to recovery starts now." On the surface of Alteris IV, the Kirani began the long process of rebuilding. Their cities, once a symbol of their oppression, were now becoming the foundation for a new future. Where there had been rubble and charred ruins, new structures began to rise. Lyra, the once frightened civilian, now stood as a leader, her presence commanding the respect of those who had once feared their fate. She walked through the streets, surveying the work being done. The Karani were not just rebuilding their homes, but their entire way of life. As Lyra passed by a group of Kirani workers, they stopped to salute her, their faces filled with determination. The Kirani had fought alongside the humans, and now they were learning to build their future with their own hands. Lyra's voice echoed over the public address system as she addressed the people, her words filling the space around her. "We stand together, not just as survivors, but as builders of a new future. We are no longer just the oppressed, we are the free, and we will make our world stronger than ever before." The crowd erupted in applause, their hope for the future shining in their eyes. The transformation was complete. Meanwhile, aboard the Dauntless, Eli Kent stared at a laser plasma display, his mind lost in thought. The data he had been reviewing flashed across the screen, showing the Draoran retreat and the early signs of the Alliance's reorganization. It was a victory, but the work that lay ahead was far from simple. "You okay?" Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. She had entered the room quietly, her presence soft but undeniable. Eli turned to face her, offering a faint smile. "Just thinking about the future. We've won the battle, but it feels like we're standing at the edge of something much larger." She nodded, her gaze steady. "We are. The Karani are no longer just a victim. We're part of something bigger. But the price of freedom is steep." Their eyes met, and for a moment they shared an understanding that needed no words. The scars of war would take time to heal, but their commitment to each other and to the future was unwavering. The alliance was starting to formalize. Representatives from the human, Kirani, and other oppressed species were meeting in the war room aboard the Dauntless. Captain Winters, now officially recognized as a liberator, stood at the head of the table, flanked by his closest allies. "Today marks the beginning of something that will shape the galaxy for generations to come," Winters said, his voice commanding the room's attention. "The Drorans may have fallen, but our true challenge is to ensure that this victory doesn't go to waste. We have to build a future where no one suffers under the shadow of tyranny again." "Agreed," Nguyen replied. "But it's going to take time. The damage is deep, and the trust between the species hasn't been fully repaired. We need to build bridges." Literally and metaphorically. A holographic map of the galaxy flickered to life on the table, showing new routes for cooperation, trade, and military alliances. The groundwork was being laid, but the process would not be quick. "Let's start with the Karani," said Colonel Rivera, his voice steady. "They've proven themselves in battle, but they still need support in rebuilding. We can't afford to forget them now." Winters gave a single nod. "We won't. We'll provide what they need, and in return, they'll help us strengthen this alliance. It's not just about winning a war, it's about creating a lasting peace. As the alliance continued to solidify, other species, oppressed and marginalized, began to reach out. Eli Kent and Lyra oversaw the first meetings with delegations from these species, ensuring that the new world they were building was one of inclusion and equality. Lyra addressed each new ally with the same passion she had spoken to her own people, her words now carrying the weight of experience. "We were once a people without hope," Lyra began in her address to a mixed delegation. "We were ruled by fear and oppression. But now, we are free. We stand with you in this new alliance because we understand the cost of freedom. We will help you rebuild, just as we have rebuilt ourselves." The room erupted in cheers, the alliance growing stronger with each passing day. Back on Altaris 4, the first signs of the Qurani's new future were taking shape. Buildings that had once been symbols of oppression were now being transformed into centers of learning and culture. The Qurani were not just rebuilding their cities, they were rebuilding their identity. Eli stood beside Lyra, both of them looking at the skyline as the sun set behind the ruins of the old Draeron citadel. It was a moment of quiet reflection amidst the ongoing work. The Qurani had lost so much, but in their rebuilding, they were becoming something new. "We've come a long way," Lyra said, her voice soft but steady. "But it's just the beginning." Eli nodded. A new dawn for the Qurani. And for the galaxy. The weight of the sacrifices made during the war was still heavy, but there was a growing sense of renewal. The future was uncertain, but the alliance had been forged in the fires of conflict. It would not be easily broken. And as the galaxy began to heal, so too did the spirits of those who had fought for it. The war was over, but the story of the alliance was just beginning. The stars that had once symbolized unreachable dreams now stood as quiet witnesses to a galaxy forever changed. Humanity's legacy, a quiet echo of battlefields and shattered empires, stretched far beyond the borders of their homeworld. Across the galaxy, from the core worlds to the outlying colonies, whispers of human bravery, compassion, and unyielding resolve spread like wildfire. Captain Winters, having led the charge, was now returning to Earth with his crew. But the mark humanity had left was felt across every species, every system. The Dauntless cruised through the void toward Earth, the faint hum of the ship's engines barely audible against the silence of space. Captain Winters stood before the bridge's large viewport, his expression somber as he watched Earth grow larger in the distance. He was grateful for the victory, for the alliance formed, and for the new alliances forged in the fires of war. But the weight of the losses, the sacrifices made, hung heavy on him. Came the voice of Commander Nguyen, breaking the silence. She stood at his side, a look of pride in her eyes. "It's done. We've secured a future for the galaxy." Winters nodded, but his thoughts were far from the celebrations. "We've done more than just secure the future," he murmured. "We've reshaped it." On Altaris 4, the Qurani and their allies were already preparing for the next chapter. Cities once torn apart by war now stood as symbols of a hard-won peace. The alliance that had fought side by side for survival was no longer a fragile partnership. It was a bond forged in blood and sacrifice. At the heart of this new era was Lyra, the young leader who had once been nothing more than a frightened civilian, now stood before the memorial to the fallen. It was a vast structure, etched with the names of both human and Qurani soldiers, a testament to their shared struggle. Lyra's hand rested gently on the stone as she whispered a prayer for the lost, the ones who had given everything for a future they would never see. A quiet breeze stirred the dust at her feet, carrying the scent of newly sprouted plants and freshly laid stone. The city around her hummed with the sounds of reconstruction, heavy machinery, voices raised in collaboration, and the steady rhythm of rebuilding a civilization from the ground up. Lyra turned to face the rising sun, her thoughts momentarily drifting to the human soldiers who had fought alongside them. They had not just liberated the Qurani, but had shown them what it meant to truly live free. Winters and his crew were heroes, but their legacy was now woven into the fabric of the Qurani culture. The humans had planted the seeds of a new identity for her people. The memorial service was held on Altaris 4, a solemn occasion where species from all corners of the galaxy came to pay their respects. Eli Kent, standing beside Lyra, watched as the faces of the mourners reflected the shared grief. But there was something more in their eyes. Hope. The same hope that had driven the Alliance to victory now glimmered in the hearts of those left behind. "We've made it," Eli said softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Lyra looked at him, her voice quiet. "No, we made it. Together." Back aboard the Dauntless, Captain Winters prepared for his final journey home. His crew had been through the fires of war, and now they would return to Earth as heroes. But he knew the true test of their legacy lay ahead. Humanity's place in the galaxy would never again be the same. The stories of their deeds, of their sacrifice, would echo across the stars. "We've secured our place in history," Commander Newen said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of their shared journey. "But what happens next is up to us." Winters nodded, the full weight of her words settling over him. They had accomplished the impossible, but now they had to ensure that the peace they had won would endure. The task of leading humanity into the next phase of their existence was a responsibility that could not be taken lightly. As the Dauntless touched down on Earth, the crew was greeted by the cheers of their people. The hum of applause filled the air, but Winters remained silent as he stepped off the ship. This moment, this homecoming, was not his. It belonged to the thousands who had fought and died across the galaxy, the ones who had made it possible for Earth to stand as the heart of a newly united galaxy. Lyra, meanwhile, was preparing for her own journey. She stood at the window of the Dauntless, looking out at the distant Earth. A diplomatic mission awaited her. She would be the first Qurani to set foot on Earth since the war's end, and her presence would be a symbol of everything they had fought for. In the distance, Earth's lights twinkled in the night sky like a beacon of hope for all who had fought for freedom. She could already feel the weight of her mission, the need to solidify the new alliance and ensure that the future would not repeat the mistakes of the past. "Are you ready?" Eli asked softly, standing beside her. Lyra nodded, her expression unwavering. "I have to be." The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, speeches, and negotiations. The alliance between the humans, Qurani, and other oppressed species grew stronger with every passing day. Earth stood as the symbol of hope, the place where the different races came together, not just for survival, but for a shared future. Yet, as the dust settled and the galaxy took its first breath of peace, there was an understanding among the new allies. The victory had been earned with sweat, blood, and sacrifice, and it was up to the next generation to carry it forward. In the quiet moments, Captain Winters thought about the future where humans were no longer just survivors, but builders of something far greater. It was a legacy that would last long after they were gone. The stars, once symbols of unreachable distance, now felt close, within reach, within their grasp. As Lyra stood before the assembled galactic representatives, preparing to speak, she reflected on how far the galaxy had come. From the depths of despair, from the oppression and tyranny, to this moment of unity. This was their victory, their legacy. "I stand before you today not just as a leader of the Qurani, but as a representative of all those who fought for a better future," she began, her voice strong, clear, and resolute. "The path forward is not easy, but together we will walk it. Together we will rebuild, not just our homes but our future." Humanity had arrived not as conquerors, but as liberators. The galaxy was forever changed, and the future, though uncertain, held the promise of something greater. It was up to them to carry the torch of peace, unity, and freedom into the unknown. And that, perhaps, was humanity's greatest legacy. The final echoes of the war had faded, and the silence that followed was not one of defeat, but of transition. The galaxy, scarred but unbroken, began its slow journey toward healing. The Qurani, once oppressed and fragmented, now stood as proud allies, no longer under the shadow of the Drowrans. The alliance, forged in the flames of conflict, had endured, and in its wake was born a new era of cooperation. Across the galaxy, the alliance began to formalize its presence. The first meetings of the Galactic Assembly were held on Alteris 4, a world now known for its role in uniting species who had once viewed each other as rivals, or worse, enemies. Now they were bound together by the shared struggle, the collective cost of the war, and the promise of a future built on mutual respect and support. Lyra stood before the gathered representatives of the Alliance. The words she had once spoken in the heat of battle now rang true, in a different context, one of peace. The Karani were no longer a people on the verge of annihilation, but a force to be reckoned with. Proud in their victory, but humble in their recognition of the sacrifices that had made this moment possible. Her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of those who had fought beside her, their faces familiar, worn, yet hopeful. Eli Kent, standing at her side, gave her a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together. "We stand on the threshold of a new beginning," Lyra's voice rang clear, "one that is not defined by war or fear, but by the strength we found in unity." It was not just the humans who fought for us, it was every single species in this room, and those who could not be here who gave their lives so that we might live. The human presence at this gathering was undeniable. Captain Winters had long since returned home, but his legacy, humanity's legacy, was now cemented in the galactic psyche. They were not just warriors, but moral guides, leaders in a new world order. The respect that the galaxy now held for Earth was something the Karani could never have imagined, let alone hope for. In every corner of the galaxy, human resilience was celebrated, not for the battles they won, but for the way they rebuilt, for how they saw themselves not as conquerors, but as liberators. As Lyra continued, her words were filled with both pride and caution. "We know that peace is fragile. We know that this alliance will face trials, that old wounds may open, and that new challenges may arise. But today we stand united in a way we never thought possible. The Drorans are no longer a threat, but let us not forget how quickly the darkness can return if we do not stay vigilant." The Galactic Assembly was a testament to that vigilance. With new trade agreements, shared technologies, and military pacts in place, the Alliance solidified its role in shaping the future. Captain Winters and his crew were honored, but their legacy was not one of self-glorification. They had paved the way for a new direction, one that demanded cooperation, understanding, and respect among all species. Eli Kent looked at Lyra, his thoughts distant. He had been there from the start, from the first invasion to the final push that brought the Drorans to their knees. But now, as the galaxy looked forward, he couldn't help but wonder how much of what they had done could truly be sustained. "It's not over yet, Lyra," Eli said, his voice quieter than before. "We've won the war, but now comes the real test, keeping this peace." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes steady. "I know," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But we will meet the future together. That's the difference." The Karani capital, once a ruined wasteland, was now a thriving hub of cultural and economic exchange. Human and Karani technologies had been merged in unprecedented ways, from energy-efficient cities to advanced defense systems, designed to ensure no one would ever fall under the thumb of tyranny again. As the Karani rebuilt their homes, they also rebuilt their identity, stronger, united, and unafraid. And as for Lyra, she had a new role to play. No longer just the leader of a small faction, she was now the representative of an entire world. Her diplomatic mission to Earth was not just symbolic, it was a promise. The future of the galaxy, its peace and prosperity, rested on the shoulders of those who had fought and those who would continue to fight for what was right. The final days before Lyra's departure from Alteris 4 were filled with long meetings, intricate negotiations, and plans for further expansion of the Alliance. Yet despite the bustle of diplomacy, there were moments of quiet reflection, moments when Lyra would step outside into the cool, starlit night, feeling the weight of the sky above her. In these moments, she allowed herself to remember the past, the pain, the loss, but also the hope that came with humanity's intervention, the hope that had been sparked in the hearts of the Kirani and their allies. Humanity had made an indelible mark on the galaxy, and their legacy was not one of violence, but one of sacrifice and renewal. They had come as strangers, as outsiders, but now they were part of something far greater than they had ever expected. They had laid the foundation for a new order, one that would endure long after the battles had ended. As Lyra prepared to leave, she knew that her journey was just beginning. The diplomatic mission to Earth would be the next chapter, one that would solidify the Alliance's role in the galaxy's future. But no matter what happened next, she knew this much: the Kirani had found their place, their voice, and together, with their allies, they would shape the future. The final moments of the ceremony were met with the quiet hum of resolve as Lyra raised her hand to signal the end of her speech. The room was filled with applause. But to her, the applause was not just for her, but for all who had fought and sacrificed. Humanity's legacy had changed the galaxy forever. It had given hope to the hopeless, and in turn had found hope in the most unlikely of places. With the Droran threat vanquished, and the future now in the hands of a united galaxy, the real work began. But Lyra knew they were ready. They had been shaped by fire, and now they would rise together into the stars.